Hi, Michael Neese, author of Interview Mastery, the world's most widely used job interview prep software, used by over 54,000 people in 73 countries. Today we're going to look at the confusion around how looking for work can be very overwhelming at times. We're going to break it down very simply and give you a framework to think about how you organize your activities. This graphic that you see here shows the job search process broken down into 4 sections, and as you can see, they all lead to an interview. So the first section is preparing, where you're assembling all your documentation and your online portfolio. I'll get into the details in just a second. The second thing is where you're actually searching for work, whether you do it online or offline through networking contacts. We're going to go through all of that. The next thing we do is we actually apply, whether you're doing it in person or online. And the final step is where you actually get to the interview process. And as you can see, we spend a great deal of time, we spend the majority of our time trying to get an interview. Because that's one of the 2 things you have to do to find a great job. You just have to get an interview. The second thing you have to do is perform your best and actually win during the interview process. And yes, it has, multiple iterations. You got your phone or your video screen and your first round of interviews, second round, and all the other things that go into the selection process. But this is a simple breakdown. And as you can see, we spend the majority of our efforts trying to get an interview. So let's break down each one of these and look what's under the hood for each one of these 4 sections. So under preparing, the first thing we have to do is pull together documentation, and it's either on paper or it's online. Let's not get into semantics here, but the kinds of things you have to put together are your resumes and your cover letters, and if you're working in an international location like Europe, you might call it a curriculum vitae instead of a resume. Then you might be in a discipline where you put together a portfolio of your work if you're a graphic designer. Or there may be other work samples that you could pull together that would be very empowering and very effective to communicate the kinds of results you can deliver. And also you pull together your list of references. Now, the next thing you have to do under prepare is you got to pull together your online reputation and pull together a LinkedIn profile. Be careful what you put on Facebook. I happen to separate my LinkedIn persona from my Facebook persona. Anything that's personal, where I have just a short list of friends on Facebook, and I only share things that are personal. And that's how I separate it, and I encourage you to do the same thing. And if you participate in Twitter, you want to make sure that the things that you put on Twitter are very positively reflective of you professionally. So you don't have to do all these things, but at the minimum you got to put together your resume or your curriculum vitae, your cover letter, and think through whether or not work samples will be appropriate for you in your list of references, and you're going to have to do LinkedIn. It's actually an excellent tool. The next section you have to worry about is where you're actually conducting your search. And this is where we spend a great deal of time. We might spend months and multiple hours every day searching for work. Again, we're still trying to get an interview, and you can do this through networking and friends of friends, looking at job postings, job alerts, things like that. Again, we're still just trying to get an interview. The next phase where you're actually applying, you might have to go through, like most of us, we have to go through that uncomfortable gauntlet of applying online to a system that the company calls an applicant tracking system. And these are a real pain in the neck. And the part of that process that gives people the most anxiety is filling out their current compensation or required compensation. So if you haven't looked at the Interview Mastery, the free video on handling the money question or the salary question, I'd encourage you to look at that, because that will give you some ideas on how to handle that specific situation, because you'd rather not give a number because you could, anyway, we could get into that that's a whole nother video. And you also you might be applying through referrals, employee referrals. 35% of the new people that organizations bring on board come through employee referrals. And the reason for that is that the current employee is already trusted. Their judgment is already trusted. So when they refer one of their friends or a friend of a friend, there's this currency of trust that you get by default by being brought in through an employee referral. Now, the last thing you do is you interview. And this is where most people spend the least amount of time. It's still remarkable. Then during interviews, when you get to the interview phase, you have to worry about what you're going to do before the interview, what you're going to do during, and what you're going to do after. And there's lots of special situations. And that's why I came up with 41 of these videos to put in the interview mastery program to help you navigate and thrive through each one of those sections. Now, let's take another look at some dimensions of these 4 phases. First, as you move from prepare to search to apply to interview, the risk and the anxiety goes up. Yeah, you get more nervous because you got more on the line. But the confidence and control that we have typically goes down. Yeah, you can, when you're on the prepare side, you have almost complete control and you're very confident. Putting together that resume and listening to your accomplishments and pulling together your references, these are activities that you have a great deal of control over. But as you move through the interview process, you have less control, and oftentimes people, their confidence wanes. So interview mastery is all about helping you regain that confidence and control because you have a great deal of it. Now, the other thing to look at is where the possibility of you getting hired increases the closer you get to your interview. As soon as you apply, you've now increased the probability of you getting hired. The last thing I want to show you is where people spend the most of their money and most of their time trying to find a great job or getting a new promotion. People spend the majority of their time and sometimes thousands of dollars preparing resumes, cover letters, things like that. And we spend months and often hundreds of dollars doing our search. And then when we apply, there's really not much money you can spend to apply unless you happen to apply to a service like a resume blaster. But this is where you blast your resume out to hundreds, if not thousands, of companies. And when you get to the interview part, the mistake that most of us make is that we spend the least amount of time and the least amount of money investing in this one sequence that is the only one in the job search process that can actually get us hired. In summary, there's really only 2 things you have to do. This is not confusing. The first thing you have to do is you have to get an interview. If you don't even have a resume, you could get an interview through a friend. And I can tell you, I have had examples when I was a headhunter where it was pretty rare, where my job, this is where I was a headhunter, and my job depended on my ability to get people interviews and coach them in a manner so they got hired. And even without resume, I could call up a hiring manager and encourage them to see somebody. It was a course of as long as I had built up over time this trust that they had in my judgment that this was somebody that they should see. So the first thing you have to do is you've got to get an interview. The second thing you have to do is you have to do your best at this critical moment. You got to win during the interview. Be your best when it matters the most. So the interview is the most important moment in your job search, your career, and really your life. And the weird part is these events. You might know that I also train interviewers how to find and evaluate candidates in a manner so they can rapidly find the talent and hire the talent they need for their organization. And they have a great deal of frustrations as well. But for the job seekers like you and I, this most important moment, this interview is such an artificial representation of work. It has nothing to do with work. My performance during an interview has nothing to do with my ability to do a job, but it's a skill that is extremely important so I can get the promotion I want or get that job that I want so I can advance my career, increase my livelihood, and take care of my family. So this, I don't know. You never think, oh, when I go to school, I'm going to be fascinated with interviews. Well, that's the way that I got to this place is throughout my career, my success as a manager or even a first-line supervisor, my success depended on my ability to hire great people. Now, as a job seeker, my livelihood depended on my ability to interview and get a great job. So I became fascinated with this artificial business event called an interview, and as a trained physicist and an engineer, I said, there's got to be some research in this. What makes the difference between people who do exceptionally well during interviews and who don't? And so I found the secret, and anyway, I divert. During your job search process, there's really only two things you have to do. You have to get an interview, and you have to do extremely well. And if you think of your job quest in this manner, it can kind of simplify your efforts. And actually, one more thing I want to add, that when you're trying to prioritize your efforts, when you're looking for work, think of, we used to do this as a headhunter, what is the closest thing to money? Now, if you have an interview come, you kind of work your way back through the sequence that I gave you, which you can, that prepare, search, apply, interview. Kind of work your way back through that sequence, which you might call a funnel. If you have something that's close to an interview, all your effort should be focused on that interview and preparing for it. Now, if you don't have an interview, you work your way back through the funnel and say, is there any place I can apply? And if you don't have any place you can apply right now, you work your way back and, okay, now I got to search. And if you don't have any, if you're not ready to search, you work your way back to prepare, where you're putting together both your documentation and your online representation. So when you're trying to figure out what is the most important thing for me to do right now, it's the thing that's closest to getting you hired and close to getting you to the money you deserve and a livelihood that you're searching for. So what I'd invite you to do is just learn a little bit more about this program that I put together, Interview Mastery, and if it's not right for you, fine. But what I'd encourage you to do is invest your time and invest your money in getting you ready for the most important moment in your job search, because these interviews are the most important moment, and it does make all the difference. So whether you use my program or somebody else's, just invest where it has the most value to get you the results you want. Get ready for your next interview, because you are going to be awesome.